classroom doing our violin lessons.
I was the tattletale in the class.
Can I have an apology, please?
I trust almost nobody.
That daddy has to sometimes use strong language.
Next time in Moscow.
I feel Delulu with no Salulu.
Take me down to Downing Street. Let's go have a tour.
Blimey.
Hello, it's Adam in the newscast studio. Last time I was sitting here, it looked like the US was talking about negotiations with Iran to end their conflict. What has happened since then is that reports emerged that the US presented a 15-point peace plan that was roundly rejected by Iran, with an official saying that the US was just negotiating with itself. And then during the day on Wednesday, word reached us that there was going to be an impromptu White House press briefing to try and clear the situation up. As we record this episode of Newscast at 6:30 on Wednesday, that briefing with the president's press secretary has just come to an end. The BBC's chief North America correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue, was there, and he's now here on Newscast. Hello, Gary.
Hey, Adam.
Is it true that you're stood in a flower bed currently?
I literally am. I'm about, well, a couple of yards from the briefing room. There's this truck that kept coming through, so we have moved into the flower bed, and this suit's going to need a clean afterwards, I think.
Okay, so you're very near the briefing room then, and we're very near the time that the briefing was happening. This was Caroline Leavitt, the president's press secretary. What's the top line from what she was saying?
Really not giving too much away, to be honest, confirming that the talks were continuing. That's what we've already heard from the president, but sort of trying to pour a bit of cold water on this whole 15-point plan idea, saying there are elements of truth in it, but a lot of it from anonymous sources is just speculation, and she wouldn't get into what she described as the nitty-gritty. I mean, she mentioned a couple of the overall arching aims of the war, and we know those in terms of taking away Iran's nuclear capacities, but some of the details that have been coming out from other parts of the world, from Israel, from Pakistan, have elements in them which really Iran would never agree to. Taking away its enrichment capacities, ending any support for proxy groups in the region like Hezbollah in Lebanon. Those things would be completely unacceptable. I mean, we've heard from the Iranians already through Press TV, the national television station there, the state-run station there, that they have rejected it. Now, there are some caveats around that because communications are difficult. It's difficult to know where the power really lies still in Iran, despite the fact that the regime remains intact. And that's according to the Americans, that the regime remains intact. But the time is also running out because we've got this yet another deadline, haven't we? A Friday tea time, where the president extended that original 48-hour deadline for bombing Iran's energy targets if they didn't completely comply.
And have we got any more clarity about what kind of level or intensity these communications are between the US and Iran? Because on yesterday's newscast, Elise was sort of coming to the conclusion that it was messages being passed from one side to the other, but not something you could really describe as talks or negotiations or even face-to-face.
It's really hard to say, and I know that's for our listeners and our viewers. That's a tricky thing to try and process because we can't be sure because we're not really getting a clear picture. There are lots of players who are weighing in here. The Pakistanis are, other countries in the Gulf are weighing in too. You're getting anonymous briefings all over the place. Unpicking that, I'm afraid, is pretty hard as things stand. And there may be some advantage to some of these players in keeping things ambiguous and vague like that, because if either side set things too much in stone, too much in concrete, then there really would be no potential room for movement forward. The uncertainty is part of the strategy, I suspect, on both sides.
And also, what do you think was the strategy behind this briefing in the first place? Because my understanding is it wasn't the daily White House briefing. This was an ad hoc extra thing added to the schedule.
Well, we don't get daily briefings from the White House. That was a long and distant memory. These are kind of events nowadays. I mean, I'm guessing off the top of my head, but maybe one every 2 to 3 weeks, maybe a little bit more frequently that, but not much more frequent than that. And they're pretty quick. You know, they're 40 minutes at the maximum. They don't drag on for these hour-long things we used to have under President Obama, etc. So, Yeah, these are rare events. This one was meant to start at 1 p.m. local, was delayed. That's not unusual, to be honest. I don't think that tells us anything necessarily. But people, I'll give you an indication of it. The room was absolutely jammed to the rafters. You couldn't get in or out. They were standing in every aisle, as well as all the seats, of course. And you've been to the briefing room here. It's tiny. It's tiny. Yeah, it was rammed. There must have been dozens and dozens of cameras and people in there. They have to kind of keep the door open, otherwise people start fainting.
I suppose that's such as the clamour for clarification or any kind of information.
It's the vacuum. It's the vacuum, isn't it? It's the vacuum which is filled by the speculation that the White House then complains about. So, you know, there's a bit of a vicious cycle here. Now, there's all sorts of rumours, you know, that J.D. Vance, the Vice President, might start being involved in potential talks, possibly in Pakistan. Again, none of that confirmed by Caroline Leavitt today. But that would be a really interesting move, I think, on this one, because we know in this administration, J.D. Vance is one of the more cautious ones about getting involved in these so-called foreign entanglements, foreign wars, endless foreign wars, as they're often referred to on the campaign trail. And to put him up front as a potential negotiator would be an interesting strategic move, and may unblock something or other. Who knows? But again, no confirmation of it. And I reiterate, Friday tea time, we've got another deadline coming along, which the president will have to either justify blowing through yet again, or we may see something more decisive happening in the military sphere before then. We're dealing with so little concrete information. It's you know, I feel sometimes like we're shortchanging the people watching and listening to us a little bit, and I'm sorry for that. But it's very difficult to get things clear.
Gary, I share yours and everyone else's frustration. Talking about military matters, though, what do we know about this increased kind of troop build-up that the Americans are staging in the Middle East right now?
Well, I can tell you a bit about that because the Pentagon has confirmed this morning that a battle combat team from the 82nd Airborne Division. Now, you know, that's kind of legendary in the US Armed Forces. It's the creme de la creme. It's, you know, you roll in the SAS, SBS and everyone else together and you get the 82nd Airborne. I mean, they are kind of right at the top of the tree, and they are used to being dropped, they're paratroopers, into sort of hostile environments, contested environments, as the military like to call these things. And so a group of them, we think possibly a couple of battalions, which could be maybe 15 to 1600, plus some divisional staff and support staff, could be on their way. They're always there under rapid deployment, these combat teams, from Fort Bragg in North Carolina. And that's led to a lot of speculation that maybe there's some consideration of taking this now famous Karg Island in the Persian Gulf, which is the Iranians' main export terminal, which has been bombed, but the oil facilities have not. That's absolutely vital to the Iranian economy. There's been talk that they could be used to try and neutralize some of the threats along the Straits of Hormuz, the Strait of Hormuz between Iran and Oman, through which, you know, the 20% of the world's oil and gas flows, and that's been closed since the beginning of the war and led to these $100 plus a barrel prices of oil and the gas going up, petrol going up at the pumps. As well as them, there's a couple of what's called marine expeditionary units also on their way. One from Okinawa in Japan, which was a forward deployed unit which has been there some while. That should get there later this week. That's another 2,500 Marines. And another one from California, which has, of course, got to cross the whole Pacific, so it's going to take a little bit longer. But as well as the talk about talks and the talk about them willing to talk, there is also a ratcheting up of strikes and now these sorts of firm kind of military boots. Not so much marching towards the region, but floating towards the region or being flown towards the region.
And Gary, we've had two very clear examples already this year of when Donald Trump puts military assets into a zone, he then uses them even though then people in the interim say, oh, maybe he's just using it to apply pressure. It tends to be the first one. It tends to be that he uses them.
Yes, it does. It does. And we saw that obviously with Venezuela. But Venezuela is very, very different to the Middle East. You know, Venezuela is a much more contained idea. It had its risks, but I think, you know, I mean, this is, and again, I'm going to add to the speculation here. You know, if you start dropping paratroopers inside Iran or inside Iranian territory onto Iranian islands, then you're going to get casualties. There's no question you're going to get casualties. Americans have already suffered some casualties. They're in the very, very small numbers in this week, what are we, week 4 of the war now. And the thing I would always say to people is that the one advantage countries like Iran, potentially even, you know, other dictatorships, autocracies around the world, the one big advantage they have is that they don't need to worry about public opinion in the way an American president does or any leader of a democracy. Public opinion can completely dismantle your case for what you're doing. It can make things really difficult, really uncomfortable, really quickly. And in a brutal sense, starting to see, you know, service personnel getting killed, American boys getting killed, American boys and girls getting killed in the theatre of the war, that can shift public opinion enormously quickly. And that is the asymmetric nature of what you're dealing with when, on the one hand, you're a democracy and you're taking on an albeit tiny minnow in military terms as an opponent.
Gary, live from the flower bed, thank you very much.
Bless you.
Now, in other news, the BBC has unveiled its new Director General, who will be replacing Tim Davie, who's been at the helm for a few years now. It's a guy called Matt Britton, who used to be a very senior boss at Google, the tech company. So what is a big broadcaster doing, bringing in a big tech guy? The person who can at least speculate about that is the BBC's culture and media editor, Katie Razzle. Hello, Katie.
Hi.
We should say this has been the worst kept secret in broadcasting, hasn't it, this guy?
It really, really has. I mean, I wrote an article that went out on Monday, but it was being reported before that. In fact, Alex Farber, we just had him on the media show. He's the Times media correspondent, and he had the scoop that Matt Britton was the front runner back in February.
Yeah.
So it has. He just said, I joined the dots. He said something quite funny, which was, he said something like, people kept saying to me, it's going to be someone like Matt Britton. And he said, and then I joined the dots and realised it wasn't like Matt Britton. It was Matt Britton.
Yeah, but I suppose that just makes you realise this is not a normal job application process. There's a lot of stakeholders.
There really are. In fact, I should try and pull out for you, but I don't know where it is. But anyway, the job application, which people did have to apply for this job, and the deadline was New Year's Eve. That would ruin your New Year's Eve, wouldn't it? Or maybe it would be good because you'd get it done and then party. Or maybe they're not those kind of people. I don't know. Anyway, very, very lengthy job application process with all the attributes you needed. But it did make clear they weren't expecting anyone to have all those attributes, because it really is a lot, because it's everything from editor-in-chief to, you know, chief strategist, to the person who, you know, has the vision, to the person who lobbies, to the person who speaks to government all the time, to, you know, it's just an endless list of things that you need to know and have.
And what do we know about Matt Britton?
Well, we know quite a lot, actually. The thing that people got excited about, or some people got excited about, was that he once was an international rower. So in the 80s, he was very good at rowing. He rowed for Cambridge in the boat race, and he also rowed for Great Britain and won a bronze at a world championship back in the 1980s. Now, that's sort of entirely irrelevant, but also relevant because the number of people who are pushing at me, you know, in those behind the scenes conversations you have when you're trying to work out about somebody, all these people pushing me, it makes him a brilliant team player. In fact, someone said to me on background, the thing about Tim Davie, the outgoing one, who was a big runner, was he had the loneliness of the long distance runner. Someone told me whereas Matt Britton is a team player. He always uses rowing analogies. He's very much, you know, very, very into teams and building good teams and working with teams and actually rowing together, someone said to me. So there we go.
Tim Davie would be appalled at the idea that he wasn't a team player.
He absolutely would, and I'm sure he was.
Let the metaphor speak for itself.
Exactly. That all I'm saying is that's what people were telling me. But then more pertinent for the job, he spent nearly 20 20 years at Google. The last 10, he was president of Europe, the Middle East and Africa. So that's, obviously the lead across those regions, but very much, what people, because I guess some people might say, but look, hold on, it's a big tech company. All the decisions are made on the west coast of America. It doesn't really, how powerful are you in that role? But I'm told, yes, very powerful. In fact, particularly because a lot of the regulation drive was coming from Europe. So he was spearheading the response to, the requirements for more regulation and how Google responded to that. And also there was a moment, the most testing moment, I think, probably in his time at Google was when YouTube, which is owned by Google, there was an issue with the advertisers pulling their adverts after it turned out that their adverts were running next to various hate speech and various other things. That was a big problem, obviously, for Google, and I'm told he dealt with it very swiftly. He apologised quickly. He was instrumental in getting it changed. So that's his experience. Actually, he has not been at Google since the end of 2024 because, his salary is not public, unlike the Director General's salary. So his salary here will be public, and we already know how much it is, £565,000 a year. But he must have earned an awful lot of money, many millions, people speculate, through his time at Google.
Probably lots of shares.
And shares and all that. And he's taken what he called a mini gap year. He wanted to spend time with his family. He learned to scuba dive, as I understand it from his LinkedIn page. He bought himself a single sculling boat. So presumably he's been doing a bit more rowing than he had time for at Google, which does also mean, because that was the end of 2024, he left Google, he's available. He doesn't have this long notice period that a lot of these high profile bosses have when you're trying to get them over to a new company, and gardening leave and all of that. So he can start immediately. And I would say, based on the fact that the BBC needs to renegotiate its charter pretty fast with the government, they needed someone in position fast.
And Google is interesting. I'm thinking back to my time as a political correspondent in the 2010s. Actually, it was in the news a lot then because there was the stuff about content being adjacent to terrorist content on YouTube. There was copyright stuff. There was tax stuff.
Tax,
There's
yeah, even that wasn't, yeah.
That now infamous clip of him in front of the select committee where Meg Hillier, the Labour MP, is like asking him how much he earns and he doesn't know.
Exactly. And that was all back in the sort of mid-2010s. That was actually 2016, 2017. So, he was there. Google had finally agreed that they would pay some back tax after a great deal of, headlines and controversy about how little tax they paid in the UK. And they had arguments about why that was and why they were headquartered in Ireland and all of that. And they had agreed to pay £130 million in back taxes, which people even then said wasn't enough, but that was an agreement. And he was the face of Google in the UK in front of the Public Accounts Committee, and it got quite testy. And at one point he was asked, about his salary, and he looked uncomfortable, said he couldn't remember, and that he would give a figure, and that caused some pretty negative headlines about him and a boss who earns so much they can't remember their own salary, whether that was fair or unfair. But his salary was never made public, so he did say he was going to let the committee know, but we certainly never found out what that salary was.
So in terms of the office he's walking into, what are something, I don't want to use that horrible cliche of like, what's in his in-tray? Because no one has an in-tray anymore. He certainly won't have an in-tray.
No. Well, he might have a sort of Google-based sort of virtual in-tray. I don't know.
Well, except we use Teams.
Oh, yes, good point. Sorry, Teams. Yes.
Little BBC insight there. What are some things that he'll be having to think about from day one?
Well, looming always, of course, is the President Trump defamation case, which is taking up quite a lot of headspace at the BBC. But that's being dealt with by lawyers in America, American lawyers for the BBC, and obviously President Trump's lawyers. But that's there. The key one in terms of the sort of short term, long term is obviously the charter renewal, the conversations with the government. Ahead of the next stage of that is a white paper when the government sets out its thinking. The BBC has been lobbying, obviously, and did a response to the Green Paper. In that, it did not say how it thought the BBC should be funded. So that's still up for grabs in terms of how is the BBC going to be funded into the future? What does the BBC want that funding? Where does it want it to come from, and what is the government going to decide about that?
In other words, is it the licence fee as it is now, but maybe a little bit smaller? Or is it general taxation so that everyone pays kind of related to their income? Or is it linked to council tax? But everyone seems to be rejecting the idea of advertising or subscription. Yes,
so everybody has rejected the advertising idea. Basically, the way I see it, you can't do it from advertising because that would have such a terrible impact on all the other public service media that does rely on advertising. So, and if you're talking about Google and how, one of the criticisms, I suppose, of getting someone from big tech into the BBC is that sort of Silicon Valley mindset. Fine, you might think, great, he'll be able to lead us into the future, and that may well be true and steer us through in this new globalised media landscape. But if you look at the figures, Google basically was responsible for decimating the ad market when it came to, for example, local and regional newspapers, as all that ad money moved from media to tech, not just Google, obviously, but Facebook, now Meta. I think Google and Meta account for at least half the ad spend in the UK. That's what the Press Gazette says anyway. And that would have been far lower, at the beginning of his time there. So there's a sort of argument, which is the ad spend now is so about a vital part of the media ecosystem and vital for the likes of ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5. If you said the BBC needed to be dependent on advertising as well, that would cause serious problems. But what is the answer then?
Yeah, we'll find out in the next sort of 18 months, won't we? Because that's when it has to be decided. I'm thinking about Tim Davie has left him a little sort of welcoming present in his office, hasn't he? In that one of the things that Tim Davie and the chair, Samir Shah, were fighting for was to end this every 10 years, the BBC's existence gets renegotiated in this charter. And now basically the government have said, oh, we might make your charter permanent, so that actually your negotiations are just about how the BBC is operating and how the level of its funding, as opposed to every 10 years, is the BBC going to exist for another 10 years?
Yes, and I'm interested in how that works. But Lisa Nandy has pretty much said, the Culture Secretary, she's pretty much said that is what they were going to do. She came on the media show last week and basically said that. And so that is something the BBC's been fighting for. Why do we always have to be justifying our existence again and worried about whether we're going to exist for the next 10 years? The only thing I'd say on that, if every 10 years you are renegotiating, which you will be, the BBC will be, funding and its terms, then presumably you could see a situation where another government of a different kind came in and said, well, the funding settlement we're going to offer you this time is, I'm joking, but like 10p or 10p or whatever, and that would mean the BBC couldn't exist anymore. So I don't quite understand that existence thing, other than it's a signal, isn't it, that the BBC is an important part of national life, a light on the hill, as Lisa Nandy called it, and therefore it's worth preserving.
And I'm just thinking back to Matt Britton's CV or his LinkedIn page. One thing that isn't really there is journalism. And previous Director Generals have usually got in trouble for journalistic output at the BBC.
Yeah, so it's fair to say he has almost no journalistic experience, no editorial experience, and also no programme-making experience. And you would say that those are two key things that the BBC does. Now, caveat, he will be getting a Deputy Director General who no doubt will have that experience. He's good at building teams around him, I'm told, who do. But you're right, if you look back at the series of mistakes that have happened, some of them, many of them, have emanated from news and current affairs. And it's not just that about the mistakes happening, it's also about the fact that it took the BBC a long time to act and make a decision. It seems to me that what you've got to do is make a speedy decision, get that down off iPlayer, apologise quickly, and yet the BBC time and time again does not manage to do that. I'm not saying it's the only company that doesn't manage, but it's so high profile and these kind of mistakes are so high profile that it gets in trouble in that. And now it may well be that he is a very swift decision maker, he takes decisions fast, and he will change things and he'll put in processes to change things. But at the moment, you look from the outside, no, you look from the inside and you think the problem was they didn't make decisions fast enough. If you bring someone in who doesn't have the experience of news and how it works, then is that going to speed things up? I don't know.
Very interesting. I'm also just thinking back to last year when I was coming into our building and I was looking downstairs into the newsroom, which is in the basement, and I saw the Director General, Tim Davie, showing Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, around the newsroom. And I thought, that's weird. But then I thought about it a bit more and was like, actually, no, in the modern world, the BBC Director General and the CEO of Apple have maybe got more in common than you would have thought, like 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so now that's sort of, if you're the chair of the BBC and the board of the BBC looking for a new DG, you can then see why they'd want a sort of Apple-y, techie kind of guy.
Exactly, and that's what they say in the press release. Samir Shah, who's chairman of the board, He talks about Matt Britton having the skills to navigate the organisation through the many changes taking place in the media market and audience behaviours. And he's talking about... sorry, what is it?
Katie has printed off the press release.
Actually, Roxanne, my lovely producer, printed it off. In this press release, Matt Britton says, this is a moment of real risk, yet also real opportunity. The BBC needs the pace and energy to be both where stories are and where audiences are. And I think that's the sort of key thing, isn't it? The BBC's just recently done a deal with YouTube to put its content, more of its content on YouTube. He is seen as the man who can steer the BBC with all his digital, technical, big tech expertise and knowledge, that he can see where things are going as the hope, and he can make sure that the BBC is there, not just sort of surviving, but thriving. But then I suppose some people would point to, there have been moments, and the BBC is a place of innovation. It has been, it invented, the media as we know it, if you like. And in recent years, the iPlayer was such a kind of innovative product, and really ahead of its time, and it was the fastest growing streaming platform in the UK and all of that. But
and still is huge.
And still is huge, but it's felt now it's been kind of slightly outpaced and out-innovated by its competitors, partly because they are putting so much money into it. Because, these are the areas where you think this guy's going to come along and have a look and really force or forge some real change.
And that's what I think will be very interesting about what Matt Britton, what his pitch is when he comes to introduce himself to his new colleagues. Because in this studio, last year, Tim Davie, the DG, did an all-staff call that I was hosting, and it was about his visions for the next charter and the future of the BBC. And it was all very sensible stuff, and it was well presented with lots of energy, like he always does. But in the back of my mind, I was like, this is just more of the same. And we don't feel like we're in a very more of the same kind of world for anything these days.
We don't. And I think... it sounds to me, from what I've gleaned about Matt Britton from people who know him, is that, and they actually said this in the famous press release that you're joking about, but the plan is that he comes in and he arrives, I think the day after Tim Davie leaves, so that's next week. And then he will sort of watch and meet people and learn and all that, and he'll officially take up the role on the 18th of May. So he's got sort of, say, 6 weeks to kind of observe. And it seems to me some of the best leaders, they do that, don't they? They come in and they look at things before they make any decisions. But I would expect that there will be, he would plan to make some big decisions. He's got to make huge cuts. I mean, they've already announced these, hundreds of millions of pounds that they need to save. If he's going to want to then spend it, investing in the iPlayer, for example, making people sound better, he's going to have to cut even more. And he's going to have to be making these hard choices pretty fast.
I wonder what his favourite podcast is.
It's bound to be the media show.
I mean, you can have more than one favourite podcast, I think. Katie, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that's all for this episode of Newscast. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back with another one very soon. And just a reminder, if you'd like to apply for tickets to Castfest at the BBC Maida Vale Studios on April the 25th, the details of how to do that are in the episode description of the episode you have just been listening to. And there will be another episode for you to listen to very soon. Bye-bye.
Newscast from the BBC.
Well, thank you for making it to the end of another newscast. You clearly ooze stamina. Can I gently encourage you to subscribe to us on BBC Sounds, and then, without having to do anything else, our meandering chat will miraculously make its way to your phone.
Oh wow, ये तो कमाल का गैजेट लगता है.
On Big Lives, we take a single cultural icon.
People like Jane Fonda, George Michael, Little Richard.
And we pull apart the story behind the image.
And we do this by digging through the BBC's vast archives.
Discovering forgotten interviews that changed exactly how we see these giants of our culture.
We're here for the messy, the brilliant, the human version of our heroes.
I'm Emmanuel Jochi.
I'm Kai Wright.
And this is Big Lives.
Listen to Big Lives wherever you get your podcasts.
Bear, please kaho cheese.
Hello. Just after we published the previous episode of Newscast on Wednesday, there was a massive news story broke in California on the west coast of the USA, where a jury found that Meta, the parent company of Instagram, WhatsApp and Facebook, and Google, or at least the part of Google that's responsible for YouTube, had created social media platforms that were addictive and had harmed the mental health of one American female user who's now in her 20s. And this has got people asking if this is a watershed moment for the regulation and the business model of social media. But of course, the big caveat that actually the regulation of these platforms in the UK and the EU is different from America. So we thought we would spend the whole of this episode of Newscast chewing over the implications of this court case with the BBC's technology editor Zoe Kleiman and Faisal Islam, our economics editor. So that's what you'll hear on this episode of Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Fatboy Slim and me in the classroom doing our violin lessons.
I was the tattletale in the class.
Can I have an apology, please? I trust almost nobody.
Then daddy has to sometimes use strong language.
Next time in Moscow.
I feel Delulu with no Salulu.
Take me down to Downing Street. Let's go have a tour.
Blimey.
Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and joining us here in person, I think actually for the first time ever, is our technology editor Zoe Kleiman. Hello, Zoe.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to the fake living room.
Never been here before. It's lovely.
Although we've been on Newscast hundreds of times.
I have, but never in the same room.
And perhaps never with such a landmark court case to discuss. We'll see. And Faisal is here too. Hello, Faisal.
Hello.
Right, so Zoe, this verdict was in a court in California. It happened on Wednesday. Take us back to sort of the start of this case and who brought it and why was it in court in the first place?
At the heart of this case is a woman who is now 20 years old, who is being called Callie. We don't know her full name. And she says that she was excessively using social media when she was younger. She said she discovered YouTube at 6 and Instagram at 9. And at some points she was online for up to 16 hours a day. So a lot of time on social platforms. And she says she had a mental health crisis. She was diagnosed with depression, with body dysmorphia and with suicidal thoughts. And she blamed her social media use for those conditions. There were originally 4 companies in this court case. They were Meta, Google, TikTok and Snap, who chose Snapchat. TikTok and Snap chose to settle. Meta and Google chose to fight. And their line was, no single app can be responsible for a teen's mental health crisis. It's a very complicated thing. This young lady had a lot going on in her life. She'd already had a difficult childhood by the time she discovered social media. And that, she was coming to the platforms to get away from her problems, and they were not the cause of them. However, the jury found that the social networks had been, in their words, negligent in failing to protect her from harm on their platforms, and that interestingly, the platforms themselves were, because of the design features within them, addictive.
And what sort of features are we talking about then?
So you'll know them really well.
Yeah.
So this is, auto scrolling, right? The fact that you never run out of content. It's auto play, so a video lands and it just starts playing straight away to sort of suck you in. It's the algorithmic recommendations that are so good, aren't they? Most of the time at serving up that thing that you didn't know you wanted to watch next. Those are the kind of design features that are very deliberately there to keep you engaged, because what these platforms need are lots of people there for as long as possible, so that when they're adults they see as many adverts as possible, and that's how the companies make money.
And was the court just looking at the features that we can all see when we use these platforms ourselves, or was there other evidence that was brought forward that the judge and the jury were looking at?
So I think those particular features were specifically brought up because, the heart of the trial was she addicted? And it's a term that we use lightly, isn't it? I'm just addicted to Instagram or whatever. People say it all the time, but addiction is actually a clinical term. And so for a court to investigate that and decide whether or not, it truly was an addictive platform because of the way it was built, is a new era, I suppose. It moves it on from that casual, I'm addicted, to actually, this is addictive.
Yeah, and what sort of remedies did the court find? Because I know they rewarded her some damages.
Yeah.
Is it just money?
Well, they haven't finished yet. So initially there are damages which total $6 million. It's about £4.5 million. And they have said that Meta has to pay 70% and Google has to pay 30% of those damages. But what we don't know is whether there will be further remedies to come. And also, Adam, you've got to bear in mind that this is only the second case of its type in the US. There are loads of these coming down the track. We've got a whole year of these coming through the courts, unless, of course, the companies decide to settle. So we're going to see a lot more of it. And already, in the two that we've had, Meta has lost.
Faisal, does this seem like a new era for these businesses?
Well, what Zoe's just described is the core business model, is it was, of many of these kind of offerings, of these forums, of these ways in which to connect people, but people with businesses and increasingly young people. And at the absolute heart of them was engagement and keeping people stuck on those platforms. And that is what made it good for advertisers. So, you kind of wonder where this goes, And it's one person, right? And, we know the numbers. And it's kind of like, it's a very human example of some of the studies that have been done across, populations of 15-year-olds. There's quite famous charts showing, around the time when social media burst onto the scene, levels of happiness amongst young people going down. And, we have, as journalists, said, well, it's not, is it cause, is it correlation, is it accident? And I think intuitively, many of us who are parents, are just like, well, it seems obvious, really. But now we're getting a kind of legal sort of pathway. And clearly, their share prices have been hit. Where does the business model go if they're being held accountable in this way? It's a fascinating.
Yeah. Well, Zoe, let's brainstorm that, because I can see a pathway, as far as it puts it, where this has cost the companies a little bit of money as far as they're concerned, a little bit of reputational damage, but they can maybe withstand that. Or is a different pathway where actually they re-engineer these products as a result of this court case? And there was a different court case in New Mexico the day before as well, wasn't there?
Yeah, so some people are describing this as big tech's big tobacco moment. And if we look at that path, what might we see? Are we going to get health warnings on screens? Are we going to see restrictions on advertising and on sponsorship and partnerships that these companies are able to do? Are we going to see these addictive features disappear? But as Faisal says, that's kind of what makes them fun, right? If you go on a social network and there isn't really anything to do, you're not going to be there for very long. Will that be the nail in the coffin? Will it just fizzle out?
Because there was an era of Facebook where you could get to the end of your newsfeed, couldn't you? And that was it. You're like, oh, well, I'll just shut it down and go and do something else.
Exactly. And because I'm really old, I remember Friends Reunited and how exciting that was, going, oh, here are all my school friends. And then I found my school friends and said hello. And then I was like, well, I'm done now. What else do I do?
Yeah.
It just got boring very quickly. And without those engagement features, arguably, you're not really left with a lot to do, are you?
And I think, though, it may be the case that what will seem to be the aberration is the fact that we allowed the Wild West of this time, in particular, to be foisted upon children. So this is where we take one case, we look at it through a business angle. By the way, because you want to know, Snap's share price is down 9%, Meta's is down 6%, Google's is down 2%, because actually this is not the hugest part of Google's business, YouTube. It's only a massive part of their business, but they do a whole lot of other stuff too. So it just shows you, people are questioning these stars, these tech stars of the US economy. How much are they actually worth? How can we actually price what they're worth if they can't do this into the future? So yeah, as we look back on this and you think, wow, if they were addictive, and then people start to draw analogies with other addictive substances.
Well, so with big tobacco.
Yeah, well, tobacco, but then alcohol, drugs, whatever. Is that now how we treat this? If it causes illness? Actually, what I don't know is, from the court case, was there any sense of internal documents that showed that they knew that this was happening? One hears from whistleblowers there've been various books about this.
Well, I was covering this on 5 Live breakfast this morning with Rachel, and we spoke to one of the lawyers who was involved in it, and he was talking about this document that had come from Meta, so the people that own Facebook and Instagram, that was about beauty filters. And basically, Mark Zuckerberg personally been presented with this sort of dilemma about beauty filters. Internal research at Meta suggests this could be bad for people's body image, but equally introducing this feature and keeping it would be good for our business. And Mark Zuckerberg took the business side of that equation rather than the mental health side. So there were documents, weren't there? The whole discovery process meant that they had to deliver internal stuff.
And sometimes I think, we are kind of surprised when these multi-billion-dollar companies act like multi-billion-dollar companies, but that's what it is. Meta might present itself as, we just want to unite the world and get everybody to be friends and love each other. But it is a business, and at the heart of that business is the bottom line.
What a wonderful game.
Is there a jurisdictional thing here, to use a very pretentious word? Because actually, regulation of companies and social media and the media generally is very different in America than it is in Europe. I just wonder if actually we're already in a different regulatory environment here.
Well, I mean, there has been a lot of complaints from the White House that it's in Europe, the European Union and the United Kingdom have been treating these companies badly. And I think where this goes is it does clearly open the floodgates if they were holding back in any way, shape or form, to kind of give these companies a massive kicking. And so this was done through this. What tends to happen in America is it's done through the court process. And what tends to happen in Europe, including the UK, is it's kind of done by governments and regulators, occasionally some bureaucrats. And we've already heard from the Prime Minister sort of piling in on the back of this about regulatory solutions. I'm not sure about the extent of any court cases here, but that has been in trying to regulate tech across a whole stream of areas, copyright and things like that. The US goes down the legal kind of route, and Europe goes down the sort of governmental sort of route.
Yeah.
And so they're quite different. This will greatly encourage those people in Europe that want to give a bloody nose to the US tech companies. There's no doubt.
The US companies have this incredibly powerful shield in America, which is this thing called Section 230. Clause 230. And basically what it does is protects them from liability for what is published on their platforms. So that means if you stick something on Instagram that is illegal or whatever, the Instagram is not liable for it. Whereas if you did that here on the BBC would very much be responsible. The media companies do not have this protection. And the argument in favour of it is that the tech companies couldn't survive without it because they've got billions of people uploading billions of things in real time, all the time around the world. And, obviously we're in an AI era now, but we weren't. And it was just impossible to manage that level of content. But there are questions being asked about whether they deserve that protection, right?
Yeah, and that bit of law comes from the Bill Clinton era, doesn't it? When the internet was very new and we didn't really know where it was going to go. So just in terms of what the companies have said, so Snapchat and TikTok, they settled in advance. Do we know anything about their settlement?
No, they have not.
Super secret American court case style. And then you hinted at what Meta had said, saying that they thought there's lots of other factors that you've got to take into account when you're looking at somebody's mental health. What did Google say?
Well, Google also disagrees with the verdict, and actually it says that it does not consider YouTube to be a social network. It feels that the platform has been sort of misunderstood, I suppose, in this case.
And the lawyer was saying this morning on 5 Live that this is the tip of the iceberg and that there will be many, many more cases. Is that what's going to happen?
Well, there are lots of cases already in the pipeline in the US, and I suspect, as far as it says, everyone is watching this and thinking, well, okay, I'm going to do it now because, there's a chink in the armour here. I mean, these companies are so mighty that the fees that they've spent defending this one case are eye-watering, totally out of the scope of most people, especially, an ordinary family or indeed an individual. Nobody has that kind of money. But they've lost, even with, that mighty defence behind them and the seemingly bottomless resources. I mean, some tech contacts of mine are saying to me quietly that they think the reason TikTok and Snap settled was because they couldn't afford to fight it.
Oh, right, because the legal fees are so huge.
And obviously there's a social movement now, and we know about it in the UK. It's pretty clear that schools are now saying, secondary school, you've got to have a sort of one phone, I guess, or like an old school burner phone. That's probably wrong as well. That's the wrong connotation.
Sound like spies.
We don't want to do that. A phone that doesn't have access to social media, you know what I'm talking about. And so that's becoming the norm now. And this is about social norms as well. Like, it's extremely hard for any parent to try and wean their kids off this stuff if it's given to them at any point. So what you're seeing is the school system, the education system. That's not mandated by the government. I think it is in some other areas, and we can discuss in a minute about whether the ban's going to come. But at school level, it's happening, and then you set a social norm, and then you find out that kids find other ways to communicate one-on-one instead of like en masse, instead of in this way of showing pictures of themselves. I think parents in general are becoming a little bit more savvy to what you want to expose a kid going through the travails of early teenhood. How much do you want them to have to like how much is too much information, connection, contact, what is real about all this stuff? And then we haven't even got on to there's all this stuff going on with social media. That's a little bit rear view mirror now, isn't it? They're all sort of becoming friends with their AIs now, and who knows where that goes.
But also look at their role models, their examples. Look at us.
Again. Oh. Yeah, there you go.
That's Faisal's smartwatch strikes again.
Look at the rest of us in their lives, right? I was on the Eurostar this morning coming back from Brussels. Every person in the carriage was on their phone almost the whole time. All the adults are on their phones the whole time. Whether they're chatting to a chatbot or whatever they're doing, I don't know. But nobody had a book or a paper. We're all doing it. So I think on the other hand, it's quite difficult to give this message to children when you're sitting there on your phone yourself, and I am as guilty of that as anybody else.
Very honest of you. Right. Oh, and I'm glad you got a trip to Brussels. I'm jealous. Let's talk about what is happening in the UK then. So the Online Safety Act finally was passed a little while ago after years and years and years of going through Parliament. But then it's had various phases of implementation, and it's only sort of in the last 6 months, the last year, that kind of Ofcom have got the full powers to actually use it. But now the government's doing a consultation about doing even more. What are the options that they're looking at? Just remind us.
The public consultation that's underway at the moment is looking officially at various ways of safeguarding children, and I can't remember the technical phrase that they're using, but it's something like children's well-being online. And one of those options, the one that of course is dominating the conversation, is should we consider a ban on social media for under 16s like they've done in Australia? And that is the one that's generating all the headlines. But there are others, and actually, interestingly, one of them is, should these design features, the auto-scrolling, the autoplay, should all of that be banned for children? And another one is about, there are various ones. There's one about VPNs. Should children have access to VPNs? Now, these are things that mask where in the world you are.
Yeah.
They're useful tools for lots of people, and they're very sort of vital privacy tools. Why do kids need them? Or do they need them? It's one of the things that's up for discussion.
And I saw that this week the government's now launched some pilots with actual families where they're going to try out different options that are contained in the consultation. So they've got a bit of data about what happens when you implement these things.
Yeah, I bet those kids are delighted, aren't they?
Yeah, who gets to be in the no change group?
Can I just ask one thing then? But in theory, if this has shown damage, it's not necessarily limited to kids, is it? I mean, the lady here, she's now an adult. But there's no theoretical reason why this may not have had a similar impact on some people who just happen on many millions more people, I guess. I'm just throwing that out there. But is this, we in this conversation, we're focusing on children. I mean, it's obviously obvious why. It was the former Twitter exec, Bruce Daisley said on air to the BBC today something like, if this actually was applied around the world, some of these social media companies would be worthless. And so since I've told you that Snap was 8% down, it's now 9.5% down.
Right. Wow. And actually, you can have no views about social media, but if you've got a pension, probably a big chunk of your pension fund is invested in these firms.
Yeah. Well, in probably Meta, which is one of the magnificent 7, less magnificent as it occurs just now. But yeah, these are... Yeah, these are seriously... I do wonder, though, if in this case the courts are just catching up with where society has moved.
Just so on the UK pilots and consultations point, again, from being on 5 Live this week, I've had a few conversations with people about this. And it's interesting because today, when Keir Starmer was on his way to Finland for this defence summit with his Nordic allies, and he was asked about the court case that we started off the episode talking about, and he then said, we're doing this consultation, which includes looking at a potential ban for under 16-year-olds, sort of sending out the signal of like, the government already knows what they want the answer to be from this consultation. But then yesterday I was chatting to the AI and the safety minister who was on air, and he was being much more open-minded about what the options are. So I wonder if actually, is the government truly open-minded about where they end up in the summer once they've looked at everyone's responses and they've done these pilot studies? Or actually are they getting on and thinking about just doing a ban? What's your take?
It's kind of weird, isn't it? Because on the one hand, it's definitely, as Faisal said, if you read the room, seems to be what people want. But they can't really be seen to be jumping the gun. They've committed to this consultation. I don't even think we're a month into it yet. They can't start saying, right, well, we think we know what you're going to say. And the other thing is there's a ping-pong situation going on at the moment between the House of Lords and the Commons. And this is over an amendment to a different bill. This is the Children's Schools and Wellbeing Bill that is primarily focused on education, but also includes safeguarding children. And the Lords wants to add an amendment which basically gives ministers a year to decide which platforms to ban for under 16s. And the Commons has kicked it out. They've rejected it. It went back to the Lords yesterday. They've pushed it again. Yeah. So it's going back to the Commons. So actually, currently, as things stand, Parliament's divided over it.
Well, and this consultation that they launched a few weeks ago was the initial response to the first time the Lords did that. So
the Lords has strong feelings about it, I think. And the government is trying to be open-minded.
I think you could probably separate out this dilemma of the UK trying to be kind of home to as many tech companies as possible and be the most attractive place from this issue of social media and children. Indeed, what you hear when you hear these companies is that they want clear regulation, right? It's the direction of travel. I don't think the UK is massively... The future of the UK would be massively specialist in social media. See what I mean?
Yeah.
Probably more like AI and quantum computing and things like that. So I think that where in other areas there's a more straightforward dilemma. If you want to host all the AI companies in the data centres and want them to invest in their best possible kit in the UK, you may have a conversation about copyright. You may have a conversation about energy policy.
Yeah.
I don't think too many of them are going to sort of run for the hills if there's a under 16.
Yeah, because this was a court case involving YouTube, which is part of Google's parent company. It wasn't a court case involving DeepMind, which is the AI bit that's based in the UK of Google's parent company.
So yeah, that's a pretty clear way of doing
here we go again.
Here we go again. That's one person in my life has the ability to get through my
through your firewall. Right. Can we talk about a few other sidebar tech stories? So Zoe, one that really intrigued me yesterday was OpenAI, who run ChatGPT. They had this tool that was available in North America called Sora, which is their video generating tool. And if you're on social media, you will have seen hundreds and hundreds of Sora videos of like cats playing violins and things like that, which are not real. It sounds like they're turning it off.
Yeah, so they launched an app for people to do their own AI-generated videos via Sora. It had enormous fanfare. They also did a big partnership thing with Disney, with the idea of creating content for Disney. And yeah, they've shuttered it. They've said, we're closing it down. I read somewhere that it didn't take off as much as they thought. And the other thing you've got to think is, it must be costing them an absolute fortune. You know, Sam Altman has said, stop saying please and thank you to ChatGPT because it costs money to process those extra words and we don't need it.
A thimble of water is used in a data centre.
Exactly.
Did you say please?
Yeah, please stop. But imagine, how much of the earth you're scorching to create your clip of your cat playing the violin. But, in terms of the money that it's costing this company, OpenAI is one of these, well, you'll probably have a view on this, Faisal. I think it's one of these companies that's incredibly big and incredibly powerful, but isn't actually making any money, wants to IPO, we believe, and really needs to start generating a bit of cash. It's burned through astonishing amounts of money, but it's not making any. And now, it feels a bit like a company that's starting to tighten the belt a bit, doesn't it? It's like it's cutting the sort of the nice to haves, and perhaps the AI generated video app is one of those nice to haves.
The economics are getting real.
Yeah, it's focusing on enterprise. It's said that, hasn't it? It's focusing on its business offering.
Quite boring stuff like coding, which is actually quite useful. But I think it very specifically, the constraint on the growth of these companies is on compute power now, which in turn is about energy. So so if you look at something like Sora, I'm going to imagine here that as amusing as some of those videos were, it isn't making any money. If any money, probably. I don't know how. I don't know how it doesn't make any money at all.
I was never sure how they were going to make. The Disney was going to make money out of me making a video of me.
They were going to take a share stake worth $1 billion, which they would hope would be worth $10 billion in a few years' time, I imagine. And you get, you can see why they wanted to do that. But like this time last year, every company was trying to do anything that involved OpenAI or ChatGPT, and every time they made these announcements, their share price went up. Now we're a world away from that. Almost like reality hit, I would say November, December. ChatGPT also facing like serious competition, for example, from Google with Gemini, but also from Anthropic with Claude for certain use cases, whereas ChatGPT is a bit more generalist. So they are. I think it's about the rationing of compute power, and in turn about energy. And therefore you deploy it exactly as Zoe says to where actually you're making revenues in time for the IPO. So it's incredibly interesting. And so that means it's going to be tougher for some of the fun but like vaguely pointless use cases of generative AI. It's going to be tougher because you'll be charged for it. Amazing. I mean, I don't know what the numbers are. Sometimes how many trees were burnt in order for you to make that video of the elephant dancing on Strictly, right? I don't know. Sorry, I haven't made that. I think I probably should make that video.
Well, you can't now. Shut it. And it's never available in the UK anyway. You'll have to use another provider's platform. And then last one, and this is going to sound maybe a bit niche to a lot of listeners, but it's a big deal in business and tech. Faisal, you were very excited about ARM Holdings.
Oh, yes.
Just explain who ARM Holdings are.
Well,
exactly household name,
they are the granddaddy. They're the granddaddy of UKTech.com era. This is very interesting, right? They rooted out of Cambridge, Acorn. They contributed 350 billion devices, iPhones most famously, cars, use their imprints. So they designed the chip core, but they never made it, right? And they've started the creation of their own chips for the first time. The manufacturing will be done in Taiwan, I think. But there's a BBC angle here. ARM is fabulously successful, born in Cambridge, and part of its success story was something called the BBC Micro, which was, and so it is now this global company. Their roots are a bit more mixed now. They were sold to the Japanese around Brexit time.
Controversially.
Yes, yeah. And now they're floated, but they're still headquartered out of Cambridge. So there are interesting questions here about, could they have built this sort of chip factory in the UK? And the answer is that we probably missed that boat.
Yeah. Well, because it's interesting, isn't it, Zoe? Because you feel a sort of bit of national pride when you talk about it. Because it was British people that invented it, but it was also British people sort of let it go, and it's now in the hands of people who are not British. So it's a kind of like nostalgia story.
Yeah.
It's a heritage story rather than a thrusting British business story.
They won't like you saying that, but I kind of agree. And I think that this is just symbolic of what happens in this country. We're good at ideas and we're good at startups and we're terrible at scaling up. Whenever I meet small businesses, medium-sized businesses, I always say to them, like, what's the game plan here? What do you want to get out of this? And they almost always say, I want to be bought by Microsoft or Google or Amazon. They never say, I want to be Google or Microsoft. There's just that ambition isn't there. I remember speaking to Mustafa Sulaiman, who deliberately decided to go to the US to set up his company. And I asked him why. He's a British AI guy. And I asked him why. And he said, firstly, there's just not the money here. We think we're doing well if we get $100,000, right? And in the States, you're talking about $100 million. It's just a completely different set of values in terms of how much money you can get. And he also said, and I think this is really interesting, that we just we have such a different culture here. We don't tolerate failure. He said in the US, if you meet a business professional who hasn't ever failed, then you kind of don't trust them because you think, well, how are you going to know what to do when
they've not been blooded?
Exactly. How are you going to know what to do when, it hits the fan because you've never lived it? Whereas here, it's toxic, isn't it? And you don't want to be near the person that's failed because they might make you fail.
Yeah.
We have a totally different mindset. And he argued, and people argue that just, means that we don't push up.
But this is why cabinet ministers are, privately kind of almost thankful for Sir Demis, at DeepMind for having, because Google kept on trying to get him to go over to America. So the fact that he kept things going in the UK, and he's quite open about this in the documentary that that's done quite well over Christmas.
I have a cameo in that.
Yes. Oh, right. No, yes, you do. Yeah.
I watched it.
You'll have to watch it.
Do you ask him a really probing question?
No, I think I'd nod.
What's it called?
It's an important part.
Yeah. You got to start somewhere.
But
it's been viewed 400 million times on YouTube. It's massive. Anyway.
There's a love affair with Britain there, which I think a lot of people don't really realise the centrality of the UK. But although DeepMind was sold to Google for $500 million, which seems like the bargain of the century now, you could argue that it's worth, within the Google empire, I don't know, $500 billion now? $1 trillion? You could argue. Just to park that there. The fact that it's in the UK and then the ecosystem that's now been built around this, we talked about this before, I don't know if it's real or not, but this London maxing thing, right? And then on top of that, when I spoke to the Chancellor a couple of weeks ago with a May's lecture, they were trying to make this case, and I'd be interested to know what Zoe thinks about how realistic this is, that for the next generation of super tech, the quantum computers, we can persuade them to stay in the UK because we are killing it in terms of the tech, but can we create the billion and $1 trillion quantum?
And Zoe, you can have the last word, but it has to be quite a short word because you've got lots of other things to go into.
Can we be the quantum champions? Well, we're good at it. We've got the talent, we've got the ideas, we've kind of getting the infrastructure. It would be nice, but already the US companies are fishing here. They're buying up our successful companies and they're waving big checkbooks. And we're all human, wave a big enough check. And of course you're going to say, well, apart from
maybe we should have a BBC Micro quantum computer. It wouldn't work.
I think if it was based on BBC Micro technology, from my memories of playing Chucky Egg in the computer lab in Glasgow in 1988.
I did a lot of Pac-Man on a BBC Micro.
Yeah, loved my BBC Micro. Right, Zoe, you've got to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Faisal, thanks to you too.
Thank you.
And that's all for this episode of Newscast. But a reminder, if you would like to see this podcast being made, along with lots of other fellow podcasts at the BBC's legendary Maida Vale Studios in West London on the 25th of April, well, you can, because we're launching CastFest, our big podcasting jamboree, and we need you to come and be there. And if you'd like to apply for tickets, the deadline is approaching. So get your skates on, which seems like a very sort of old tech. Actually, no, that's like BBC Micro, isn't it? Get your skates on. The details of how to get your skates on are in the episode description of this episode of Newscast. And we will be back with another episode very soon. Bye-bye.
Newscast. Newscast from the BBC.
From one newscaster to another, thank you so much for making it to the end of this episode. You clearly do, in the words of Chris Mason, ooze stamina. Can I also gently encourage you to subscribe to us on BBC Sounds? Tell everyone you know, and don't forget you can email us anytime at newscast@bbc.co.uk, or if you're that way inclined, send us a WhatsApp on +44 0330 123 9480. Be assured, I promise, we listen to everyone.
Hello, breaking news about a very important deadline. No, we're not talking about Donald Trump and Iran. If you would like to apply for tickets for CastFest, the podcasting jamboree we're doing at the Maida Vale Studios in West London on the 25th of April, we've extended the deadline for applications by a little bit. So if you fancy coming to see me, Chris, and the others, and some of our podcasting cousins making their podcasts in real life on that Saturday in April, then the instructions for applying for tickets are in the episode description of this very episode of Newscast, which, as usual at this time of the week, is going to be our roundup of the momentous events of the week, which we recorded on Thursday night, which was broadcast on BBC One after Question Time.
Newscast from the BBC.
Fatboy Slim and me in the classroom doing our violin lessons.
I was the tattletale in the class.
Can I have an apology, please? I trust almost nobody.
That daddy has to sometimes do strong language.
Next time in Moscow.
I feel Delulu with no Salulu.
Take me down to Downing Street. Let's go have a tour.
Blimey.
Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio.
And Chris in the Newscast studio.
And Lise Doucette is in the Newscast studio.
And joining us this week is Stephanie Flanders from Bloomberg.
It's a delight to see you all. And a delight to have you here.
Now, you launched that podcast, Trumponomics, didn't you? Did you foresee oil heading towards, I don't know, $200 a barrel as a result of Donald Trump?
We have, had plenty to talk about since Donald Trump came back to office, and that is just the least of it, I would say.
Right, lots to discuss as the conflict in the Middle East enters its fourth week. Lise, you and I have convened most days on various BBC programmes, 5 Live, Newscast, to try and work out if there are negotiations between the Americans and the Iranians. Where have you got to after 4 days of trying to work it out?
Everyone's going to switch off from this programme now because you've just said that we've asked the same question for the last 4 days.
I mean, there has been a different answer every day.
Still don't have an answer. It's a difference of definition, but it's also a difference in the understanding of what constitutes diplomacy. That President Trump has been saying for days, very strong talks with Iran, and that there's serious negotiations. And every day the Iranians say there are no talks and there are no negotiations. And I think what we hear from Iranians and others who are part of this mediation process, because a lot of third parties involved, is that there are no talks per se. But today we did get more details. Today, for the first time, we had a confirmation from Steve Witkoff, President Trump's favorite envoy, that they did put forward what he called a 15-point plan, which could be the basis of a peace plan. And we do know, and he confirmed that it was going through Pakistan. And we think that is the main channel now, that Pakistan, of course, is Iran's neighbor. They have very good country-to-country ties, despite strains every so often. And it does seem that the Army chief, who's a field marshal, Asim Munir, actually knows the man that President Trump hints he's talking to or wants to that there's talks already taking place with Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who is Speaker of the Parliament and also has played key roles in all the main security institutions. So those proposals seem to be going back and forth. So I think it's important that a channel has been opened. But let me finish by saying, if you look at those 15 points from President Trump's team, 5 points from Iran teams, they are maximalist demands. There is zero chance that they will be accepted by the other side. And quite frankly, they really don't seem to set the stage for serious negotiations.
And Stephanie, the world markets seem to react to every kind of microsecond of extra news or analysis about what these negotiations or talks or back channels could be.
Yes.
Also in quite wild ways as well.
So if Adam and I are confused, are the markets confused?
I think they're confused. It depends. I mean, I think what the markets have stopped doing is listening to every word that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth, because that is certainly something, tends to be vary even in the same sentence, let alone in the same day. We did see oil prices go back up, though, today, because I think there was a general feeling that there is nothing, to Lisa's point, there's nothing that's coming out of the White House or our attempts to back up what's being said by the White House that suggests that an agreement is anywhere close. And I think, with the Iranians particularly focused on, will there be a ceasefire they can actually believe in, as opposed to a period of pause before they then get attacked again? All the urgency seems to be on the US side. And that's kind of the extraordinary thing about where we are. Iran seems to have an incentive to have this war continue, amazingly, despite the attacks on its country, because of being able to take the global economy hostage via the Strait of Hormuz, because of all these things that we know about. And it's the US that really wants it to stop.
And at least the meme, the diplomatic meme I keep seeing from observers is that Iran is playing a weak hand very well.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? And this is what the military would call an asymmetric war. President Trump and his Secretary of War, today he nailed the plaque onto the Defense Ministry to say, take us seriously. I am the Secretary of War. I'm not the Secretary of Defense. And he pumps out all the statistics and that 92% of the Navy's gone. And President Trump has been saying, even from almost the very first days of the war, that the war has been won. We've completely destroyed. There are 100% of the military assets of Iran are destroyed, and yet, as they say on social media, with the 0% that Iran has, it is still able to fire missiles into Israel, lower rate, but it's still firing, and to fire into Gulf states. The way this war is, and this is, every war unfolds on two levels. It unfolds on the ground, but it also unfolds in terms of the battle for the narrative. And this is the first artificial intelligence war. So both sides are trollers in chief as well. And the memes, people are saying that Iran should be heading Netflix now because they're doing Lego animations, they did movies. But more seriously, both sides say, and they absolutely believe that they're winning. So President Trump says, we've defeated them. And you know what Stephanie said? They're desperate for a deal. And Iran says, we've defeated the United States and we're desperate for a deal. Iran has done what they call horizontal escalation. And it is quite astonishing that they have suffered extraordinary losses. That seems factual. Of their ballistic missile program, military bases, a whole range of leaders assassinated, both top commanders as well as top officials. But they have changed this from what they themselves described as an existential battle when it started. President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu talking very clearly about regime change. And now it's a battle for the Strait of Hormuz. They have weaponized the world's critical waterway. So they are now fighting a completely different war on a completely different terrain.
And that is their one card.
Yes.
So I think it's not the case. They've always had this one potentially strong card. And what this conflict has taught them is that they can deploy it incredibly effectively and incredibly cheaply. I mean, when you talk about asymmetry, and we tend to say the other phrase is, they're on the wrong side of the US are on the wrong side of the cost curve. Mm-hmm. But, the drones...
That's very Bloomberg.
The drones that
we love your Bloomberg phrase.
In other words, because the Iranian drones are very cheap and do quite a lot of damage.
You're taking down the cost. So take even the mines, right?
Yeah.
What's the cost to the US of actually reopening the Strait of Hormuz? Well, potentially enormous, and more than any of the number of troops that are currently on the way there could potentially do. How many mines does Iran need to actually create a minefield in the Strait of Hormuz? Potentially none.
Because the threshold of risk for the insurance companies that insure the tankers is very, very low.
And the drones are very easy to produce and cheap to produce and can be produced in very non-military looking sites, very normal kind of industrial factories. So then you have to broaden out the number of things that you're hitting in Iran. So the asymmetry, both in the ability to withstand the war, but also the cost of it is quite extreme. And by the way, Iran is benefiting from the rise in the oil price, and its oil is going through. It's just other US allies' oil that's not getting through. It's effectively Iran has sanctioned the US.
Well, yeah, because if you're China or India, you can have a tanker going through the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes.
Which suggests there aren't any mines there at all.
They are.
Well, they're being escorted, or they're being pointed which ways to go.
Yeah.
It's a bit unclear what's happening.
Which, brings us back. I mean, we can bring Chris in here because, Sir Keir Starmer's hesitation to join this war, because this discussion, again, raises that absolutely crucial question about why did they go to war and what was the planning for this war? Because even though President Trump continues to say, we knew this was going to happen in the Strait of Hormuz, the way every day they seem to come... eye roll from Bloomberg.
They don't act like they knew this was going to happen.
They just seem, I know this sounds really cruel, but they seem to be making up as they go along, bringing thousands more Marine from Japan, sending in troops from the 82nd Airborne Division. It really sounds like they just were not prepared for this option.
Yeah, and the Prime Minister, whilst facing difficult questions about UK defence budgets and where UK defence assets are deployed, whether it's to the Mediterranean or to the High North. The Prime Minister's in Helsinki at the moment, talking to the Joint Expeditionary Force, and a big conversation that feels very January, which is about kind of the High North and Greenland and where we were just a couple of months ago in terms of the conversation that was then circulating around President Trump. He is absolutely of the view that he feels he strategically called the UK's position right in terms of those big questions that remain live now about what the end game is, what the objective is. And then the wider question that circulates now, picking up on the conversation of this last couple of minutes, which is that Iran outwardly remains powerful and influential in terms of shaping this conflict and the knock-ons for the global economy. With the wider question, I guess, for newscasters, Lise, of the seeming sustainability of the Iranian regime, able to continue prosecuting an argument around the Straits of Hormuz and also its longevity, which seems fair. Is that fair?
Well, the big question is, ever since, and especially this year, where you had this major protest wave across Iran, and everyone said, "Was the regime what's going to happen to the regime? Can this bring down? Can this bring down the government?" But there were no mass defections. There were no cracks, and there certainly wasn't collapse. And so far, we haven't seen any defections. There have been some reports that some police officers haven't been showing up for work, but there's so far no cracks, certainly not collapse, and certainly not capitulation. And remember, even before the war was started, President Trump mused to his envoy Steve Witkoff that he was curious as to why Iran hadn't surrendered, because in facing with, even before they used it, U.S. military might, which the Iranians then trolled him. The foreign minister put a flag up and saying, we are Iranian. That was the first indication of President Trump's misunderstanding of Iran. And it seems to have this capacity. It has been preparing for years for this. They knew this war was coming. So the layers of succession are layers deep. Today, the Israelis assassinated. Their intelligence is stunning. So today they got the head of the Navy. They had got the head of Navy intelligence and other senior officials in the Navy.
And also the Israelis pitched that operation to take out those officials as a way of opening the Strait of Hormuz. So rather than an airstrike on a facility, it's an airstrike on individual people making decisions.
And it's like you get Caroline Leavitt, who's the White House spokesperson last night. And again, they're incredulous because they think, we're America. We're the best army in the world. And Caroline Leavitt goes, but they've been defeated. How come they're not giving in? They don't understand. They really, there's a huge gap in understanding and a huge gap in trust.
Is there an apparent contradiction there? Because on the one hand, it would appear that Israeli intelligence is incredibly good and therefore incredibly close to the levers of power within Iran and where particularly significant figures are geographically so they can be targeted. And yet there seems to be a sustainability, a durability to the regime. Is that a contradiction? I don't know.
I think we probably should also exercise some humility. We don't have what we know is they're still standing. We don't know how hard it is for them to communicate. We've heard that, and they've talked about this, that they decentralized the command and control, it's called Mosaic system, so that when the war started, they wouldn't have to always be referring to Tehran because they knew it would be difficult to communicate. And whenever there's a threat from President Trump or there's an attack, Iran immediately retaliates, which again says they haven't lost completely their capacity.
Two people died in Abu Dhabi today, didn't they?
Yes.
As a result of the interceptors.
Yeah. And finally, with this, they all know they have a bullseye on them. There was a report saying that the Americans had taken Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi off the kill list and taken this Mohammed Bagher Ghalibaf off the kill list.
So that they'd be available for negotiations.
But this disconnect, as you say, about sort of seeming to make it up as it goes along, I mean, Israel seems to be much clearer, and I think possibly because of its greater intelligence, is believing that this is going to be a long and has to be a continued attack. I mean, you partly wonder with the extent of the intelligence penetration they have, whether they're just waiting for a Mossad agent to be declared the supreme leader, which is surely a matter of time. But when you hear Donald Trump talk about it, it's this extraordinary thing of like, well, we could have talked to him, but, well, the Israelis will probably kill him too. You know, there's this the lack of... he seems relaxed with a degree of lack of coordination that the US has just never seen in any of its in any conflict.
But going back to the economics, I'm thinking of big shocks to the world economy that we've all lived through. So the financial crash of 2008, you could feel the panic. You could see the panic in Canary Wharf. The COVID lockdowns, you could feel the panic about, our government's going to be able to borrow any money anymore. This is serious. The full-scale Russian invasion and the surge in oil prices, you could feel panic. I'm not feeling panic from the world financial system, even though I keep being told it's really bad.
Our yardsticks for these things have been somewhat distorted by the events of the last
it's all relative.
15 years.
Okay.
And we would probably think this was pretty dramatic if we hadn't lived through all the things that you've just described in recent past. But, I mean, I think it's the sort of worst of all kind of shocks in a sense, because it doesn't feel like as dramatic as something like COVID, where people accept this is going to be a major hit and people are going to be hurt. But unfortunately, in real time, if you're Rachel Reeves, you're looking at an awful lot of your forecast going out the window. I mean, we're even seeing it, the sort of the very short-term inflation forecast. You have these nowcasts which predict just what this month's inflation is going to be, and they're about 0.5 percentage point higher for March than they were at the start. So we've already seen that immediate impact from the oil price. I think from the kind of volatility you've seen in markets, from the uncertainty, from the change in our expectations around interest rates, all of which dates to this, the attack on Iran in 4 weeks ago, that translates into probably 0.5 percentage point off growth and a non-negligible chance of a recession for the UK this year, which we've seen people talk about this week. So that is it doesn't feel maybe dramatic enough for you, I know.
Well,
but,
no, I don't want it to be dramatic. I'm just using it as an indicator for how worried I should be as a human being. But Chris, was it the OECD today? Stephanie will correct me. Doing their growth projections. Britain is now predicted to have the second lowest rate of growth in the G7 group of the richest countries. I remember not so long ago, Keir Starmer's target was to have the fastest rate of growth. So, I mean, that's literally been turned on its head.
Yeah, and I think what's striking looking at that OECD report is it's not surprising that they are saying that this is going to have an economic impact, will have an economic impact on the biggest economies in the world. But looking at it through the UK prism, the seemingly disproportionate impact here. And then the challenges for Rachel Reeves, and actually picking up, Stephanie, on your point about the framing of how we look at this in the context of, say, the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, we've got used to, haven't we, in a way that we wouldn't have done if they hadn't come at the frequency that they have, of these moments where we say, a Chancellor's projections are fed into the shredder, things are looking grim again, a non-negligible potential for a recession. How might a government step in? What might be affordable? We've seen it this week, haven't we, with the expectation management we've heard from the Prime Minister and from the Chancellor.
Oh, yes, because Rachel Reeves has tried to rewrite the expectations of what the government will do.
Well, because I suppose, because of the recent apparently once in a whatever it is, century or whatever, events that we've had, whether it be the pandemic or the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, where there have been these, in relatively recent history, and therefore in the memory, the sort of folk memory of the electorate, big, and not just big, massive state interventions to help with energy bills or to pay wages during the pandemic with furlough, with massive consequences for the public finances, ongoing challenges for the Treasury and for Rachel Reeves, and then her saying this week, and we've had this sort of dripped, if you like, into the national conversation over the last 2 or 3 weeks from the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, but then said explicitly by the Chancellor this week that support will be targeted. It won't be, she hopes, need to be universal. That recognition, trying to make an argument about what is fair and what is affordable. But it is also true, and the Chancellor's acknowledged this, that, the spring statements of a few weeks ago came, 3 or 4 days after the Iran war started, and where any assumptions that there might have been about where things were economically are being rewritten. And at just the point, as we said on Newscast the other day, that the likes of Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer were tentatively in public, a bit more so in private, but tentatively in public, sounding a bit more positive about at least some economic indicators. And now you look at this OECD stuff, and indeed more widely what's on Stephanie's screens and all the rest of it, and it's grim.
The only upside is the OECD is almost always wrong.
There we go. Well, so we could actually have the lowest rate of growth in the G7 rather than the second lowest.
Yeah.
Also, Stephanie, I'm just thinking again back to the recent past, and that you can't fight the old conflicts in the modern day. But politicians are usually a bit behind the curve, aren't they? They talk a good talk about, this is what we're going to do, and then the world throws more stuff at them, and they have to be more ambitious or do more. Or
I mean, I think the difficulty about this is that it is, at least from a lot of perspectives, inexplicable. I mean, it's one of the US decision to do this for all the reasons that we've discussed, and given all of the sort of gaming of different scenarios that US administrations had done, that security and intelligence people in the US had done for decades, more or less since the Iranian Revolution, every time they gamed out some kind of intervention in Iran, it had ended with, or even begun with, the closing of the Strait of Hormuz and enormous uncertain costs and difficulties. And that's why successive administrations hadn't done it. So I think you'd be forgiven. It's true that, whenever Donald Trump sort of sends troops and aircraft carriers to a region, he tends to want to use them. But the idea that you were going to have this kind of severe attack, I think, just seemed improbable to people because, and not least because, we may get onto this, it's so counterproductive in terms of some of the other things that are happening. If you raise the oil price, well, for a start, you help Iran and it's getting a lot of its oil through. You hurt some of your biggest allies if they're not able to get their oil through. Although Saudi Arabia is able to send quite a lot of oil through the Red Sea.
In the other direction.
And you are helping Russia significantly at a time when probably the economic pressure on Russia a few months ago was greater than it's been at any time since it invaded Ukraine. So if you're the Treasury, it was sort of reasonable to at least anticipate that you wouldn't have this degree of conflict so fast and so suddenly.
And is it helping Russia because Russia, which was a bit of a pariah as an oil provider, is now like Putin's the go-to guy because he's got loads of it?
Before this, it was looking at a major discount on the oil it was selling because of the sanctions. That was meaning it was looking at a big budget deficit. The cost of the war, becoming a complete war economy, was really weighing on the financial sector. Ukraine was actually making some progress on the battlefield, even though, of course, Ukrainian cities were suffering enormously from lack of heat and other things. There was, again, some cautious optimism from the Ukrainian side. That's all completely reversed now. The oil, Russian oil, is now either has no discount or is actually it's able to charge a premium. It sold some oil to India this week at a premium over the world price.
Right.
Its budget deficit, if these oil prices continue for any length of time, it's more or less just disappeared. And of course, you've also got the eyes of the world, almost entirely, and including most of this podcast, talking about Iran, and certainly much less talk in the US of potentially doing anything to help Ukraine. So this is. It has had probably that's the biggest sort of consequence, which other countries who are supportive of Ukraine now have to try and deal with, and Ukraine is trying to deal with on itself.
But we are seeing lots of bits of the world sort of rewiring in real time, and so another example of that, Lisa, is Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukrainian president, in Saudi Arabia today, almost looking like he's going to do a deal with the Saudis to help them defend themselves from Iranian drones, because he is now the Mr. go-to guy for drones.
Yes, he's very clever, very, very strategic thinker. He realizes that the drones that are now being fired at Gulf states are actually Iranian-made Shahed drones. And so he offers the support. They're the experts now on how to deal with the drone attacks because Russia brought so many of them from Iran. And so he's the go-to guy on providing. So they've already sent technical advisors to many Gulf states. We don't know exactly what he's discussing in Saudi Arabia. He might like to ask for a bit of money, a bit of help, saying we're all part of the same. The Ukraine war has now expanded. Please keep me on your radar too. He will offer something, and I'm sure he's hoping to get something in return.
And I think we don't know what was being discussed in the meeting, but they would definitely also like to have some investment from the Gulf nations in their domestic arms in defence industry, which has done extraordinarily well in developing the drones. But that would also clearly help support the war effort. And then at the same time, they're also on the other front, because the Russian oil is now being sold on the market so easily. We saw this week for the first time in a while serious Ukrainian drone attacks on Russian export terminals. And at least by some estimates, it's about 40% of Russia's physical export capacity has been wiped out by those. So that's bad news for us as well, because that's less oil in the world market and probably higher prices. But it shows the Ukrainian desperation to try and respond on these two fronts to this change in the situation.
Well, that's the Ukrainians responding to the different financial incentives you were just talking about. And Chris, talking about the rewiring, we're now learning maybe what the future demands on the British Navy might be, because today you've got Keir Starmer in Finland with this joint expeditionary force, which is his group of like-minded northern countries in Europe, they're talking about upping their commitment to the Arctic to, as you said earlier on, assuage Donald Trump's concerns about the Arctic from January. But then you've also got Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron on the phone to each other about a marine task force for the Strait of Hormuz when there is a peace deal to get things moving again. That seems like two quite big new commitments. Oh, and by the way, we're going to be boarding more Russian dodgy oil tankers in British waters as well. Yeah. That's 3 new missions just today.
Quite. And so it's no surprise that whenever I speak to anybody broadly in defence circles, by the way, of almost any political affiliation, but at the moment, clearly, those around the Labour government, talking about how important it is when they get the chance, and at the moment there is quite a lot of chance, but maintaining that conversation about how our defence posture in the coming decades, in other words, beyond any particular government, is going to be in a very different place, and trying to win that argument. And that's clearly not an easy argument to win when you're also talking about NHS pressures. Oh, and by the way, some more strikes coming up in England in a couple of weeks' time, and questions around welfare and the bill. So the Prime Minister in Helsinki, as you say, with this wider discussion, and then this argument that we heard John Healey, the Defence Secretary, making this morning around what's known as Russia's shadow fleet. Again, we're getting to how Russia transports oil around the world. And I think quite a significant, it's not happened yet, but as and when it does, it'll be quite a significant moment. This decision taken, signed off by the Prime Minister, that they believe is legal, where British forces could board Russian ships passing through, for instance, the English Channel, if they are deemed to be illegally transporting sanctioned Russian oil. But how you go about doing that, and the special forces that you are potentially putting in harm's way in so doing, and then are these boats, these ships, transported to British ports, etc., etc. Anyway, that is now a live possibility. We're told by the Ministry of Defence that it's likely to happen soon. So that becomes a thing down the track, because either it does happen with who knows what consequence, or it doesn't happen, and the question will be, well, why not? Because these ships are still moving around.
I wonder whether he's talking to Donald Trump about that, because that's what they were doing in the run-up to the Venezuela operation.
Well, indeed,
and bombing.
And that particular ship that had changed it from memory, had changed how it was flagged on its route. And of course, you can see these things happening some way off because they don't travel wildly fast. But then you can make a decision about what you're going to do and what response you might get if you board a particular boat, etc.
I think that was the point. So my understanding is that was why there'd been so much concern before this. There was a rationale for boarding, which you could also say you could say it was environmental regulations. There's lots of sort of reasons you could potentially board, but there was just this uncertainty and fear about how Russia would respond. And it just shows, if it does happen, to your point, just shows that threshold has been crossed, because there's this desperation to have Russia not gain quite so much from this other conflict.
At least it's speculation, but we do have a fair idea about the Russian playbook. How might Russia respond against Britain if British commandos are boarding a Russian shadow ship in the English Channel, if there is an escalation?
I don't know. What is the playbook? We seem to be having a whole new library now of things that are happening. We don't.
Well, mystery drones over Scandinavian airports.
Standoff. I would imagine that they won't take it lightly, and it's one of those things where you have to not just do something, but be seen to be doing something in order to establish deterrence. It's all about deterrence, isn't it? To ensure it doesn't happen again.
Adam, can I throw in just an extra little sidebar curveball?
Sidebar curveball.
Well, in the sort of multi-layered overlapping elements of all of the stories that we've been kicking around, whether it be Iran and Russia, there was a report published this week into alleged foreign interference in UK politics by a guy called Philip Rycroft, a former civil servant. There was one particular line in it which I was just reminded of in the conversation, which I just pulled up on my phone around all of this. Asked for examples of what Iran has been doing, he said, this is Philip Rycroft, that the day after Iran's internet went down, the number of posts about Scottish independence dropped by a quarter.
Yes.
So just throw into the mix in the
what they've been up to.
Yeah, in the
and
context
that's not
of,
because Iranian citizens are weirdly interested in devolution.
Yes. That's an unlikely explanation. So just throw that into the mix and the swirl of all of this.
And yes.
Just, yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, the newscasters might ponder.
And Steph, I was going to give you the last word because I remember chatting to a diplomat in my previous life who'd worked for a European Prime Minister for a long time. And he said something that really stuck in my mind. He said that when there's a crisis and the pressure is building in the boiler, you can never predict which gasket is going to blow where. And it's unusual things that take people by surprise. Is there a particular thing you're looking at or that you might think, oh, that'll be the thing that will pop that maybe we're not taking into account? I mean, I'm getting you to predict the future now.
Well, you're getting me to, what's the really unpredictable thing that no one's expecting?
Yeah, go ahead, predict it. The unknown unknown.
That is the classic thing.
No, but is there something that is sort of...
It's actually, I think when it comes to... the economy and the oil price and whatever, actually the Strait of Hormuz, which is a very obvious thing, it really is important how long that stays partially or effectively closed. I remember in the first week of the conflict, we had on Trumponomics, we talked with the chief emerging market economist and also Javier Blas, who's this fantastic commodities expert and commentator. He just said they've got 4 days to reopen the strait.
Right.
And if they can't reopen it in 4 days, that's when you start seeing it. And of course, that 4 days has long since passed. We've already passed the sort of short, sharp shock aspect. But it's the length of time. It's not even sort of the intensity. When it comes to the oil, it's the length of time this is closed, because that also means you have a backlog. How quickly can you get everything through that would have been passing through all of this time? So it's not exactly an exciting sort of... whatever your phrase, the gasket that's going to blow.
Not my
I will add something.
It's a slow burn.
I'll add a curveball.
Blow a gasket.
Just when we're told, when everyone's
a curved gasket.
Guess when everyone is getting up their maps to find, and this drives us mad, the straits. It's not the straits. It's one strait.
Singular.
The Strait of Hormuz. There's another, joker in the pack or curveball, whatever. The Houthis have been on standby. Remember a few years ago, the Americans and the British were bombing the Houthis because they had been blocking the Red Sea. And from what we understand is Iran has said, hold fire to the Houthis, don't get involved yet. And now there's an indication that the Houthis are going to join the fight. And then therefore it won't just be about the Strait of Hormuz, it will also be about the alternative routes which involve the Red Sea.
And Saudi Arabia is getting about $3 or $4 million a day, barrels a day through the Red Sea. So it's actually managing to get out a lot of what it has been producing. So that would be...
And with both of those things, you think, how long does it take to then get back to a level of confidence where things can flow normally?
But this is the point. So you have this card that has now been played, and Iran has learnt that it can play very cheaply. Once it's been closed once, it can be closed again.
Well,
so there is a legacy of this conflict for future presidents, let alone Donald Trump, let alone the rest of us.
My version of the gasket was going to be that the best joke on the new British version of Saturday Night Live, which was on Sky last Saturday, was about a shortage of helium. And that's a reference to the Strait of Hormuz being closed because so much of the world's helium goes through there, and you don't just need helium to do funny gags with your voice or to blow up someone's balloon for a birthday. It's used in lots of important industrial processes. Stephanie, thanks for coming in.
Great to be back.
Lise, good to see you for what feels like the 900th day in a row.
Always a pleasure.
And Chris, good to catch up with you too.
Thanks, Adam.
And that's all for this episode of Newscast. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back with another one very soon. And just a reminder, if you'd like to apply for tickets to Castfest at the BBC Maida Vale Studios on April the 25th, the details of how to do that are in the episode description. And there will be another episode for you to listen to coming very soon. Bye-bye.
Newscast from the BBC.
From one newscaster to another, thank you so much for making it to the end of this episode. You clearly do, in the words of Chris Mason, ooze stamina. Can I also gently encourage you to subscribe to us on BBC Sounds? Tell everyone you know, and don't forget you can email us anytime at newscast@bbc.co.uk, or if you're that way inclined, send us a WhatsApp on +44 0330 123 9480. Be assured, I promise, we listen to everyone.